Hello, good morning, greetings, and welcome to another episode of Karmayogi Talks. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Rupande Shah, a very highly recognized architect. Rupande Shah and Associates is a boutique design firm based in Kolkata, known for its innovative use of materials and unique spatial experiences. The firm specializes in residential, corporate, educational, and medical projects, blending efficiency, beauty, and functionality in each design. Rupande has nearly 30 years of experience. She holds a master's degree from the Pratt Institute in New York and a bachelor's in architecture from the Academy of Architecture in Mumbai. Her global exposure and Indian roots bring a distinctive international design perspective. She's also an advocate for heritage conservation and a member of the Calcutta Heritage Collective. Rupande's work has been highly published in leading design magazines and has earned multiple accolades, including being named among the HOT 100 Architects by Architects in Interiors India in 2015, 24, and 25. She has been honored by organizations like FICCI Grohe, FOAID, and Times Ascent for her contributions to architecture and design. In 2025, her work will also be seen in Forbes magazine. So, Rupande, very warm welcome to you to Karmayogi Talks. As you know, our audience today are government officials across the Indian system, both the center and the states. So I want to start by asking you, what I think is a very obvious question of the impact of design on spaces. And since we're, here in official capacities, public work, working spaces, both public and private. How does that impact the efficiency of individuals? And what should we be thinking when we come every day of the impact of the design of spaces where we sit and work?
Okay, good morning to everybody, and thank you, all of you all, for giving me this chance and opportunity to share some of my thoughts with the larger audience. So coming back to your question, Shobhana, I think, most of us spend more time and energy in our offices. We spend about 8 hours a day in offices. And it's very important for the office spaces to be thoughtfully designed, which not only inculcates creativity, but also helps collaboration. Because I think today's day and age, everybody works in teams, and there is a strong sense of collaborative actions that require to be done for any kind of sort of task. Very nicely, naturally ventilated and airy spaces are also very important, we feel, when we are designing the architecture of the building. When we're coming into the interiors, we're looking for very strong ergonomic furniture, because that defines the comfort and the ease that we can sit on our chairs 7 hours, 8 hours a day. We normally try and design offices and spaces in such a way that, there is a segregation of private, which are quieter spaces, and open spaces, which are collaborative, where people can get together. They're called breakout zones. So we want people to get together in offices and be a part. It becomes almost like a family working together. We do not want to have, when we design, we do not want to have separate hierarchies or separate cubicles made. The open office concept works very well because it allows this collaborative thing to happen. And the basic thing that I feel is, because we work in offices and we want them to be as happy as possible, use of things like plants, textures, art, all these make together as a quick recipe for a happy and a well-designed office space.
I'm very much in tune with you on the open office concept. Mm-hmm. But even in these official spaces, you have decision makers who are often in need of privacy, and they need to, conceptualize or problem solve or whatever, counsel. So a decision maker's working space, what would you as an architect keep in mind when you are designing a space for somebody who is the top person or in any decision making capacity? What goes into that to enhance their sort of cognitive and other abilities, creative abilities to do their work in the best way possible?
So all offices have to have these different zones, and private, all offices have hierarchy. So the higher up that you are on the hierarchical ladder, you do need specific clear zones which are made out for the senior officials, which are very private, which are very well designed in terms of sound insulation, because you do not want sensitive information moving from one department to another or one person to another also. So you want these kind of spaces which are not only sound insulated, but they are very, very clearly defined in terms of the hierarchy. But at the same time, they also need to interact with their colleagues and their juniors, who also need to be a part of a lot of work that they do. So the spatial need for the seniors should be very clearly demarcated. And this should be very clearly demarcated in such a way that it's a quieter zone of the office. It should also be accessible to the juniors. And in that zone, I think very specific technologies can be used, like you need video conferencing, you need multiple levels of technology being set into those areas so that they can work clearly, faster, better, and productivity increases to a large extent. So those zones have to have a clear hierarchy.
Right, right. I was wondering, Rupande, how many government projects have you taken up over the years, the decades you've been designing?
I'll be honest, I haven't been able to work on any government projects, and by default or maybe by just chance, that I have unfortunately not been able to work with any strong government bodies. We worked with a fair number of NGOs and things like that, but not a government office at all. It's an interesting experience, and maybe at some point, if time and the flow of things go well, maybe I'll get to design a government office. Who knows?
Yeah. Now that we have you on Karmayogi Talks, the government ecosystem is watching you. So, because I often wonder, there are, sitting in Delhi, there are these old office buildings which have been from the time of the British, and then some newer buildings. And I often, think to myself how much government officials feel they can influence the spaces in which they spend so much time every day. And what should be some of those things that they would say to their superiors or the decision-making bodies, what they require, for a happy space.
I think the government machine works at so many different levels. So for me, I think if I was to be given a government project to work, I would try and make sure that the interdepartmental communications stay quite clear. Because if each department is put into a little box kind of stuff, and the flow of communication, visual, physical, and emotional connect between departments don't happen as easily, there is always going to be a flaw between my department versus your department. Finally, the whole government is one, and we want every department to work together, which is true in any kind of office structure, that we want the offices to work together as a harmonious unit. So I think in interdepartmental systems for governments, the flexibility of movement in terms of the visual and physical should be very clearly defined. And you talked about the old buildings, and I think India has so many beautiful old architectural monuments still there, which are in the hands of the government. And the government has some immense capacity to try and bring that architecture back to life while bringing in new technology. So literally having a marriage of old versus new, that you retain the old values and old beauty and bring in new technology and new systems that are required for today's day and age for working. And I think if the government wants such projects could probably be eye-catching for the rest of the world, because the kind of structures that we have in India are probably by far, far superior than a lot of other countries have that. So I think if the government wants to put their hand onto it, it could be like a win-win situation for everything.
Yeah, the work, as you know, has already started with this very beautiful central vista, which is transforming, and I'm sure that the vision the government has to modernize is going to be put into motion. Sometimes what I think about is the material, the use of our own local material. There was a time we used to import so much into our country. But the use of traditional materials, stones and other things, to modernize these old buildings, what is that process like?
I think we as Indians have now realized in the past probably a decade or so, that we should not ape the West. We have our own cultural values, we have our own design sensibilities, and we have a vast, we have the vast, immense collection of different materials that is available within our own country. Forget our own country, our own regions. Our country is so large and wide that different kinds of materials available in the east versus west versus north versus south is so vastly different. So to use locally sourced material is probably one of the biggest things that I would strongly propagate. That not only does it make the place contextually applicable, it also becomes economically more feasible, and it becomes sustainable. I mean, we are all talking about sustainability and using less and less of resources and wasting less and less of resources. So everything that can be sourced locally and with the help of local artisans. Today, I think Indian artisans are by far being given the platform to display their products either through government sources and so many other areas, that if we as designers can start tapping into this local market of artisanal creativity, I think each area in India would have like a treasure of creatively, beautifully designed spaces. And I think the government has already started doing that, as you said, with the Central Vista that has happened. And it's going to be more and more. I think it's the government is very, very active. Even the riverfront development in Gujarat and in Lucknow and all have been eye-catching. People are talking about it, not just at national level, but at international level also. So I think this is definitely a step that the government has taken towards making sure that we are retaining contextual meanings in our places, in our public spaces, and using contextual, locally sourced materials, which is, as I said, is highly sustainable. And we should. That is, I think, 100% required.
Yeah, you're so right. And on the point of aping the West, I think now it's very clear the West comes to us.
Yes.
For not only the technology and other things we have to offer, but design and materials. So there's this trend, Rupande, of this biophilic designing of buildings, of public sector buildings. Can you tell me how that works, and what are the things that are taken into consideration when designing such a building which has more nature and less artificial lighting, etc.?
Right. So, I love biophilic projects. Most of my projects have an element of biophilia into it. There is also another trend that is very good, is biomimicry, which is a little complicated because it is on a technological point of view. But biophilic architecture or biophilic design basically is using as much of natural resources, whether it's natural light, ventilation, locally sourced materials, plants, and trying to break the boundary between inside and outside. So if one was to just have large windows and allow the trees from outside to be seen from the inside, that's a typical example of biophilic things. And I think we are already walking towards it. We, meaning the entire design community in India, with the projects that we have talked about, we are walking towards making the place seamless. The indoors and the outdoors almost merge into one another. And I have seen, and I can tell you with 100% authority, that when biophilic designs are brought into not just offices, but homes or even medical institutes, educational institutes, people being there are far more happier and far more pleasing. There is a soothing nature, as human beings always connect with nature and with plants and things of that sort. So I've always seen that there is a pep in the mood when you have this one large tree right in the middle of the courtyard around which the entire architecture is centered, and it just brings a smile on their face. So I'm big for biophilic designs.
Yeah, I think the buildings that I've seen that have been designed that way, make working in those buildings so wonderful. At the heart of anybody who's a designer like you, of buildings, of spaces, one wonders, how do you choose your projects? Like writers and artists, are you pulled into designing a space for a particular reason? And what makes you choose project A over project B? And what do you sort of imagine it to be once your pen is on the map and you start designing?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, Shobhana, because when we began our careers, as you read out about 30 years ago, um, it was like we didn't have an option and a luxury to choose, because I was so hungry, and we are so uh, driven to be able to prove ourselves to the world that, hey, we can design. So the first, I think, maybe 15, 18 years went off in trying to get and do every project that came our way, whether it was a project that we had our heart into it, but finally when we took on the project, we made it to have our heart into it. So it was in that sense. But the past 10 years or so, God has been kind, and we've had the luxury to be able to choose our project. So when we're choosing projects, it's not the size or the budget that matters. It's the challenges. The more the challenges, the more exciting it becomes, because now it is proving to yourself and not to the world that you can do this. So whether it is a design challenge that is coming our way, or whether it is a time-based challenge that is coming our way, I think that excites me now more. Also, I think over the past 3 decades that I've been working in this profession, I feel I'm pretty I can pretty much judge a person in the first meeting itself or no. So I like to look for freedom in the kind of work that we do, because more often than not, designers get suffocated with clients demanding what they should be doing. Now, we don't want to be told that do this. We want a brief saying that, hey, you know what, I want a Kerala style home, or I want a corporate office that shows the culture of the city that I'm living in. And then it is something that we as designers like to interpret it in our own way, which is the journey which has helped us in this journey. And then we'd like to portray it to a client, saying that this is what we are talking about. And more often than not, it does click with the client. Because if I'm listening to what the client says, that I want it like this and I don't want it like this, then there is no creativity left in the process. So I like to look for projects that give me a little more freedom than what I would, instead of being told what to do, let creative people get their freedom. And I think that's when the best comes out of a project.
I think you're somebody completely after my own heart, because I think creative freedom is the best gift we can give to our work. At the risk of maybe offending people or whatever. But yeah, you have to be. One of the things which many people love, I'm sure you do, I do, and many people in our beautiful country, are our heritage buildings.
Yes.
And and they're just so magnificent, and they go back in time. So the restoration of these buildings and what it takes to give them a contemporary touch, but yet keep the historic context. How are those architectural decisions made for heritage buildings?
So there are two aspects to a project like that. So if a project which is within the heritage uh, sort of list, where the government lists out that these are heritage projects and they should not be at all subject to any kind of change, those come under a different vertical itself. Where so as you've written in my you've read out in my bio that I'm a part of this group called Calcutta Heritage Collective, where there are a lot of individual people who are working towards restoring old heritage in Bengal, whether it is in Calcutta or Mushidabad or Serampur, which has a lot of old Portuguese, Dutch, British, all these architecture, and a lot of Bengali homes. So that we don't want to tamper with anything at all in terms of bringing in any new elements into it. Historically, we have seen that there is a great importance attached to these buildings. So we try and keep them as pristine as possible and use the right materials to make sure that the old materials are not damaged by the use of new concrete or new materials. Whereas the other part of the vertical in this heritage architecture is something that I'm also very passionate about. So in Bengal, there are a lot of old houses and old structures which do need to get reused now. May it be a public space, may it be a museum, may it be a cafe, may it be an art gallery. So in those kind of structures, a slight deviation from getting away from the total heritage part and bringing in new technology, which is required in terms of air conditioning and sound insulation and all, which deviates a little from the historical architectural buildings that you have. Now, those buildings, the second set of buildings that I'm talking about, if they are handled properly, and I think these buildings are there all over our country, because our country has been building for like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. So if those buildings can find another use, reusing it and giving it a new leash of life through different zones or through different mixed media uses, as I said, is it could become an art gallery, an old beautiful house, or it could become a boutique, it could become even a museum. Those are also projects that I'm very passionate about. And I think if the government lays down certain very specific rules, like heritage buildings listed in the grade A, grade 1 and grade 2 should be retained the way they are. But the other heritage buildings which are not within the grade 1 and 2 should still be maintained the way they are, but given it a new lease of life. I think that would be a very interesting direction that we can give to our spaces, public spaces in the whole country,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think it would just make things even so much more beautiful. And
Yeah.
the other thing is there's a focus now on safety. I can tell you that houses and buildings being rebuilt, for example, in Delhi, where I live, there's a lot of focus on safety because of the seismic zone on which these buildings stand. Delhi, being coming in the high seismic activity. Have you seen that now has become a paramount requirement in any space that you're designing? It should have pillars and it should have, the ability to withstand, for example, a high impact earthquake.
I think that is imperative now. We've seen a lot more different unfortunate natural calamities in the past 2 decades as compared to many more years ago. I think safety of buildings is now of utmost importance, whether it is to be withstanding earthquakes or Amphan or any kind of cyclones that are coming in, and whether they are old buildings or new buildings, the rules that the government should lay down to make sure that designers, builders, and local government bodies follow these are absolutely necessary now. We sometimes we tend to oversee the fact that we need to stick to these requirements. But I could tell you for myself as an architect, even when we are doing an interior architecture project, we do not even chip the plaster off a column. because we know that by doing that, there is a certain amount of vibration that happens in the column. And if we need to work around the column, there's always a second layer, like a skin created around the column to sort of bring down electrical conduit pipes or whatever is required, air conditioning pipes, but not touching the structural elements and safety of a building is like the Bible of an architect. And we cannot even think about playing with those elements, because we're talking about safety of people, and lives are at risk here. It's unfortunate
Yeah.
that some have taken place in buildings, and I feel very enraged when I see illegal construction coming up in buildings, and then the government steps in to get into demolition, and when they're talking about demolition, there are other connected risks to the demolition that happens. But I think as Indian citizens, or as conscientious citizens of the country, every person should stay away from doing things which are not approved by the government.
Yeah. And the other thing that one wonders sometimes is, when we have a particular sort of, I don't know if the movement is the right word, but for citizens as well as public officials to have, to start taking more interest and have a say in the spaces that they inhabit. Some kind of forum where they can give ideas. Because when, as you know this well, when any project is being contemplated, several firms make a pitch, and generally the ones that are known, have done good work, are chosen. But how can we make having a say in the spaces in which we live and work? How can the normal citizen or even a public official have some say that this is how we feel the government can consider building XYZ building?
I think that's a great idea, Shobhana. I do feel, I totally second your thoughts that, the final end users of the project should have a say in how they want to conceive and see the spaces that they're living in. However, it's a little risky also, because if the more heads you have, the more conflicting opinions and decisions would come. But I think if a centralized body is made for every large construction that's taking place, like say a renovation of a new part of a city or expansion of the airport, if there are not just designers and builders who are involved, but maybe a few sensitive citizens, local citizens, who are aware of what should the people want, it would greatly benefit all of us, not just the project, but would greatly benefit all of us. Because sometimes as designers, what happens is we start working with blinkers on our projects, that we have overlooked certain things that somebody may come across and say, hey, why did you not think about this? And one thinks about it and say, maybe I should have talked about this, or maybe I should have incorporated these facilities also. Why not? So such collaborative interactions with local people or a normal citizen who's sensitive to space and who's sensitive to design, if that kind of a body exists, I think it would benefit every public space and every private space that we build and we design now.
Yeah, it's definitely, something to think about. And also perhaps we think of some way where policymakers, decision makers can interact with architects, get some idea of the way thinking goes, design thinking goes into especially into public buildings. More of an interface, because we all need to be educated in understanding building design, construction. The other thing is, there are, of course, a lot of poorly designed and poorly made buildings all across the country, which have maybe withstood the test of time. But when someone like you looks at them, you feel, well, this needs to be redone. So how do you, begin to redo something which has been poorly done? And how do you convince, especially people who need to bring something down, that this is not ecologically or otherwise sustainable? You will have to redo it. What kind of a negotiation is that?
It's a tough negotiation, I must tell you. But as you rightly said, is when we go through our cities. So I'm originally not from Calcutta. So I have lived in many cities, and I have then eventually decided and settled down in Calcutta because of family reasons.
Yeah.
But when I have lived through different parts of the world, not just India, I feel that there is so much that every city is can learn from. We can learn from each other and do that. And we as Indians are very sensitive to our Indian designers, I would say, to our climate and to our environment. Because, we are unlike the West, where they always lived in matchboxes which were contained because of the weather situations. Whereas we have been the luckier generation, or the luckier kind of people, where we've lived for hundreds of years without technology backing us up. And still, like, look at our palaces in Rajasthan, they're so well ventilated. Look at the houses in south of India. I mean, they have like 45 degrees or 50 degrees temperature, but a lot of them still are so beautifully well ventilated. So to learn from those principles and then bring those principles into these poorly designed buildings, which sometimes have mimics these matchboxes that are there, and to convince a person or a client or a government organization or a private organization that, look, this building is beyond repair kind of stuff. You do need to think about revamping it from scratch. However, having said that, I still am a very strong believer that there is never ever a requirement to bring down a whole building if one can manage to work around the existing structure. Why am I a believer of that? Is because of sustainability. I mean, why go through the whole cost of breaking down a whole structure and then rebuilding it in that same place unless it is structurally not viable anymore, which is also a possibility. If the structure is not viable and we cannot do anything to rectify it, it's probably better to bring it down and rebuild in that same place. But then structures which are just ugly looking could still be made beautiful looking, bringing in environment and context into your projects by just revamping them in from total. That requires cost, time, and energy, all three. And it has to be a multi agency kind of a project because it's not possible for only the designer to conceive it. We need the structural people, we need the government interface coming in, we need the owners and the property holders to be coming in. And it can be every building, I think, has scope of bringing in good design to make the spaces more habitable and beautiful for its end users.
Now, when we think of public buildings, Rupande, even though we are now no longer a poor country and there are generous budgets, but there are always constraints on resources for public buildings and all that goes into planning it and making it cost effective. So what are some of the considerations that would go into making something really sustainable, biophilic and all of that, but within a budget which the government can sort of invest because there are so many other priorities? Are there some key indicators where we can, within a limited but good budget, design very good public buildings?
So, I feel today, as you rightly said, we no longer are a poor country. And I think we are a proud country. I mean, most Indians are right now, we hold our head high and say that we are an Indian kind of stuff. We have earned the respect in the world today of being called a proud Indian. So I do not think that there is any harm in the government probably trying to get into public-private sort of collaboration. And I think a lot of companies like to do it, but haven't had the chance to come on board to bring in a public government and private collaborative thing where the government controls certain parts and the private agencies are bringing in certain resources. So everybody has a share in the whole thing. So that is one of the ways that I think we can bring in bigger budgets because budgets are very comfortable in the private sector now. And I think, as I said, is people would be proud of being a part of any government sort of initiative which is for the betterment of the public. But in the event that the private resources cannot be pooled in, but one still wants to make a project which is beautiful and which is aesthetically designed. I think use of local materials and local artisans, as I talked about earlier, is the best way to bring in a quality of design into the projects. Like, as you know, living in Calcutta, and everybody, the whole world knows about the pandals of Durga Puja in Calcutta, and now we have, since last couple of years, we've got the UNESCO tag also. And if these pandals are actually studied, there's so much of creativity and beauty within it, made with such simple but local materials and local artisans, that it's a lesson to be learned. I go for these pandals every year just to boost and trigger my imagination. So in the events that we cannot bring in private resources, now, by the way, in a lot of these pandals, a lot of private money is also coming in, because everybody wants to make it it's a matter of pride that they've contributed towards this cause. So in the event that the private sector does not contribute to a project, then I think the government should talk about and think about using local people in every form: local architects, local designers, local craftsmanship, local labor. And rather than even bringing it or transporting material from another part of the country to that part, our country is so big, cost of transportation itself increases so much. So the more local and contextual we keep it, I think it would be far more economically sensible and aesthetically more beautiful, because it would speak the design language of that area, of that locality.
I couldn't agree with you more on Durga Puja in Kolkata. And I spent many, many summers or sometimes winters in Kolkata as a child. And it is phenomenal what they do with design of the goddess. The other thing that I often wonder about is that, for example, you've been doing now for 30 years the work that you've been doing. What are some of the early lessons that you learned as an architect all those long decades ago that you feel are still relevant in your practice today? And where have you had to change and sort of become more nimble and include technology? So how has the sort of goalpost shifted, and yet some of the ways that you were doing your work 30 years ago, you still do it and it's still relevant?
So, I think design is ever evolving, because human beings have evolved. Our needs, which were there 30 years ago, are no longer the same today. Our needs have evolved and have become far more complex. However, whatever we designed, functionality is the key to every project being success. If you cannot satisfy the functional needs what the project requires, whether it is in terms of spatial planning, or it's in terms of the scales that you need to use, or whether it is in terms of the aesthetics. If these basic functionalities are not taken care of, I think the project is not heading in the right direction. Now, the changing needs or the requirements of design have shifted a lot. The goalpost, as you said, has shifted a lot, because the younger generation today is not only well educated, but well traveled and very sensitive generation. In fact, I think I'm very proud of this generation that is there, because they not only conscious of the world around that they have grown up in, but they're also conscious of the larger universe that is there. And most younger generation, the Z and then the Gen Alpha that we talk about, they are all very, very conscious of the environment. So the goalpost today has changed towards sustainability to a large extent. We are using products which are not harming and damaging the environment. We are using products that are far more consciously sourced. Like, say, suppose, for example, timber, which is one of the key things in design, whether it's a building or whether it's an interior projects. We need timber for our doors, and we need timber for our panels, and we need timber for furniture and everything. So now they have very specified sources that actually provide timber which is grown specifically for the sake of building materials. So felling of forests indiscriminately has now been looked down upon by designers. That when we are specifying materials, also we want to know that where did you source this product from, and so that has changed a lot over the past maybe 10 years, where consciousness has come. Even specifying paints which are non-VOC, which are not harmful and not spreading toxic fumes into the environment, is what we are all talking about. So the goalpost of design has changed, not in terms of the functionality, but in terms of the specific needs of the material that are being talked about, because we want to become more and more conscious in terms of trying to see that we are not harming the ecosystem more than what it is necessary.
Oh, that's very interesting. Can you share with me, Rupande, some of your most favorite projects to date, which when you look back or now, you take great pride that you were part of designing them?
Oh, our projects are like our babies. It's very difficult to
Yeah.
distinguish as to which is our favorite one or which is not our favorite one. But lately, I have been fortunate enough to do some projects which have been very close to my heart. And they have been more to do with restoration, as we just talked earlier. So, as you know, Calcutta is a club city. We have a lot of clubs which are very old, more than 300 years old, and that kind of stuff. So, and now the club culture, which is being very strongly used by the younger generation, does require a makeover, because the clubs have been 200 years old, 150 years old, and they are needing to have a new image and a new identity. So recently, I was fortunate enough to design for one very old club of Calcutta, where they wanted to. The club had unfortunately gone through a period of decay in terms of not just the building, but also in terms of the members being a part of it, because the members thought that, oh, the spaces are not well designed and we don't want to be a part of it. And disposable income is quite comfortable now among the younger generation. So they would find other means to find entertainment. But the club was losing its life. And they brought me in to revive the club. And we managed to do a good job, touch wood. And today I'm proud to say that the club, whenever I go across and meet anybody, they talk about how well the club has revived because of the certain spaces that we have been able to revamp and re-bring the life back to it. So this was almost like a public space, but an indoor public space that was getting designed. And it was a big responsibility to ensure that, we are trying to bring in keep in the old character of the project, but bring in, as I just said, the newer elements that the younger generation needs. So that was one of the projects that we did it a couple of years ago, a year and a half actually. And I'm very proud to be associated with it. And we've also had the good fortune of restoring certain old houses for reuse purpose. And those are delight to work with, because they not only are challenging, but they're challenging in terms of the design, but they're also challenging in terms of the structure. So now you have this old house which is 120 years old, and it's ground first and second, and it has very steep wooden staircases, and the wooden staircase is in perfectly good condition. But the family cannot use the top floor because nobody can climb up to the second floor anymore. So how to incorporate a lift within the premises or outside the premises without losing the distinctive character that the architectural structure has. So to bring in and mix the new and the old. It reminds me actually of the Louvre in Paris, where the modern structure was built right in the middle of all the old classical buildings, and it became iconic. It's now iconic in its own place by itself, So these kind of challenges I have been fortunate enough to be a part of. And I think that's what excites me about my profession, because it's always a new challenge I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, no, you're enormously blessed, I must say. We focus a lot, Rupande, on cities,
Yeah.
in terms of design and all the new things we can do. But I have done a lot of travel through rural India over the past years, almost all parts of the country, but the rural parts. And I'm wondering if in the architects community there is any thinking or dialogue on what can talented architects offer to maybe smaller towns and to rural spaces, which can be of help, maybe as part of a CSR activity or something where rural communities also they are very advanced in terms of knowing how
Yeah.
to live with the environment, much more than the city. But are there some other things that can be done to make a
You know,
contribution?
this is one thing that is has been bothering me also, because we do not have a specific body that architects or designers can contribute towards rural development. I've always thought that tourism architecture for tourism is a big thing, but it is just exploited in some parts of India, especially which are the tourist spots like Agra or Rajasthan or Kerala backwaters and all. But I think the entire country has almost like a tourist paradise if you go to the smaller villages and all. And unfortunately, we, as you said rightly, we are urban people. But given the chance and given the right platform, I think there will be a lot of people who would want to be a part of rural development. And I can tell you, I know of people, and I can tell you for myself also, that we would do it pro bono because we feel that now it's a time that we can contribute to the society in terms of giving what we have enjoyed. Our country has given us the name, fame, and everything, and I would be very willing to be a part of rural development if at all wherever it's required. So we've done a little bit of, we meaning me and my firm have done a little bit of rural work in Gujarat, which is where we are from, where certain old schools needed to be revamped, or certain old like we've just done something with the cemetery in one village in Gujarat where we come from. But that's too small a drop to be accountable for. As designers and as architects, I think if we are given the choice and opportunity, as I just told you earlier, I know a lot of people who would willingly contribute towards rural development, not just in terms of architecture and usability, but also trying to develop it as tourism spots. But for that, it has to be a very strong government interaction that happens, or intervention that happens, I would say, that they allow private people or designers to come in and do that, because these rural places are also very cultish. They do not like, they are opposed to urbaners or urban dwellers coming in and trying to spoil their space, spoil according to them. But we are just trying to come in and give them a better, systematic, and a very thoughtfully designed, better environment. And if the government supports us, I think it's a great opportunity for designers who are established to want to go and adopt one particular village or one particular area and then work towards the betterment of that area.
Yeah, I think state governments they need to think about that, because each state has something so special
Correct.
to offer.
Right.
Yeah.
You're totally right. Totally right. It needs to be a private government collaboration that takes place.
And what has happened in Gujarat, I have a special affinity because my mother was from Gujarat.
Oh,
And
was
what I
she?
saw, yes, what I saw that riverfront development that you talked about, it's quite magical the way that has come up.
Yes.
And it always made me wonder that, why can't we have even smaller places in the country have a development like this? It's so beautifully maintained. It's just
Correct.
lovely. Yeah. So do that for, smaller cities, villages, so that there is beauty in living than what they have. Well, one of the questions which I should have asked you in the beginning, but I'm now, after listening to you, so curious to know, is how did you decide you wanted to be an architect?
Oh, it was, I just, see, I've been creative right from the beginning, but to pursue and make a combination of art and science was what actually inspired me to do architecture, because it's actually a combination where you are designing spaces which are going to be habited by people, people are going to live there and thrive in there and things of that sort. But it needs to have a very strong artistic inclination. So that, I think, was exciting for me when I started thinking about what I want to do after class 12. You're like 17, 18 years old. One is very young at that point to take a decision. And I know a lot of people who have taken the decision have thrived in their decision, and some people have realized that, oh, this is not for me, and they have backtracked and done something else. But I think the minute I joined College of Architecture, I just loved every minute of it. And I knew that this is what I was meant to do, and this is what I'm meant to be, kind of stuff. So I think architecture was very intuitive for me in terms of a decision that I had to take.
Hmm. And a sort of final question from this, that when you do any project, the kind that you do, or any other artistic endeavor, one almost gives 200% to the effort.
Yeah.
And after it's done and it's designed and your building is on its way, do you actively find yourself disengaging, especially a project that you've enjoyed a lot? Or do all of these projects stay within you, and then you sort of go and look at the building 2 years later and see how it's doing? How does that work?
Well, I cannot disengage from any project of mine. So I do more of interior architecture rather than buildings. Even when I'm doing buildings, they are more smaller private spaces. And I've been fortunate enough to develop a very good rapport with most of my clients. So I always like to go back and see them. And the beauty of our project, but the beauty of my profession is when I go back, say 5 years later, just to say a quick social hello, a cup of tea and all, and I find the place exactly the way we had left it, or it has just matured even more than what we had left it. It makes me feel good. And especially when we have clients coming back and saying that, hey, this is the house you designed 15 years ago and we haven't touched it as yet. Would you like to come and just give us tips to sort of make it look a little more fresher and a little more newer? And that's the most rewarding gift that anybody can give us. And I'm very passionate. That's my positive or negative part. And sometimes when I do have to have hit our head against the wall with clients not listening to us, it's only because I'm so passionate and I want to convince them that this is what it should be done and this is how the design should be. And why can't you see sense of it, kind of stuff? But for me, my projects are my babies. I can still remember from my first project onwards to most of my projects and the whole journey behind it. So I cannot disengage. It's, I think, my weakness.
Yeah. I mean, if that's a weakness, I think it's a great weakness to have, because what is life without passion for life and for work? So, Rupande, wishing you, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today. I think a lot of people would have learned a lot from listening to you. We wish you the best. I will definitely come to Kolkata and meet you and see all the beautiful work that you do. And we hope to again have you come and, on another day and teach us some new things about architecture and design, which we need to learn. So thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for joining us this morning. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.